So, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be with us today, and welcome to our webinar of the month on the ins and outs of client billing. And now I will present the millions that you'll spend this webinar with. So Mackenzie Gray, a product education specialist that has been at Amelia for a week longer than me, little fun fact for you guys. And we got to do our training together, so I can attest of how cool of a guy he is. And he will be answering your questions behind the scenes in the Q&A chat box and answering a few of your questions live. And to the left, you can see myself, Tristan. I'm a customer care specialist for over 2 years now, and I'm really excited to teach you guys a thing or two about client billing. So let's start with our agenda. So we're going to start with the client billing. Then we're going to look at what is the client billing subtab, operations and other buttons, income versus cash flow, current versus expected balance, how to read a client account and really understand it. Then we're going to look at the upcoming payment subtab, the purchases subtab overview, and finish off with a few frequently asked questions and tips and tricks. So let's dive right into it and start with the client billing. So what is the client billing subtab? The client billing subtab might seem a little daunting at first, but that is only because it is filled with a lot of information. But once you understand the logic behind it, it becomes extremely useful and very helpful. So let's start by breaking down what is on the subtab itself. At the top, we can see the client's name. This account happens to be to my lovely colleagues, Katrina's. So just underneath, there's the operations button. To the right, we have a filter button, the sort button, and finally, a search bar to search transactions if needed. We will revisit those shortly for a more in-depth look, but first, let's look at the bottom portion of the page. So if we move down the page, we can see a list of all of the client's past transactions and information on these transactions. You can see the type of transaction with the reconciliation status underneath, the date it was done, a little description of what it is, and to the right, we can see the income and cash flow column. Lastly, on the total right, we can see the balance on the account at the time of the transaction. And for example, when the invoice was created here, the balance was $420 because the client owed $420. But then the payment was made, which reduced the balance to zero. And lastly, we can see the current balance on the top or bottom right. So now let's revisit the buttons at the top we spoke about earlier and what they can do. And don't worry, the operations button is by far the one with the most features. So let's tackle that one first. Starting with the make payment button. So this option is used to make a payment on an account where there is a balance to pay. If a client came to you with a paper check or cash, you can manually enter the payment to their account to keep track of this payment. You can also make online payments here. For example, if the client has a saved card on file and they have authorized you to charge their card, or if you have their credit card information, you can make an online payment this way as well. The make account deposit button is very similar to the make payment button. However, this is usually used when you want to add money to an account that doesn't have a balance to pay. So for example, a client hands you a $20 bill and wants you to put that money on their account. So when their child comes in for their swimming lesson, they can go to the canteen and grab a snack or a water bottle, and the money is already there for the child to use. This can also be seen as a payment in advance before there is an invoice to pay. So that's the big difference here. Make account deposit is used when you don't have a balance on the account, whereas make payment is used when you do have a balance on the account. The use scholarship option is for our organizations using the scholarship module to use scholarships in the account. You can use the create invoice option if you need to add additional fees to an account, for example. So let's say a client requests to switch from one activity to another, but it's past the deadline. So you would invoice them late fees. This is how you would do it. Some organizations will also use this feature to balance accounts when there is a credit on the account that's been sitting there for a year or two and the client is not coming back. So you want to bring the account balance back to zero, you can create an invoice to counterbalance the credit. Now let's take a look at creating a credit. You can use this option to add a credit to an account, and let's go over a few examples we've seen. So firstly, a discount was not applied at checkout, so you want to lower their invoice amount after the checkout was complete. You can add a credit. If a client is a staff member or a volunteer and you want to give them a credit on their next purchase, you can also add a credit. Next, the record a refund option is used to manually enter an offline refund to the account. For example, if you are refunding a client $50 cash, for example, or you're writing them a check, you would use this option to record your refund. However, if you are wanting to refund them online back onto their credit card, let's say, then you would either refund during your invoice cancellation or directly from the original payment where it says electronic payment via Amelia. The reconcile account button can be very helpful and time saving to help quickly reconcile all transactions that can be reconciled in the account. A quick little reminder that we have a webinar that covered reconciliation of client accounts in depth that we've done in the past. So definitely take a look at that if you would like to see more on this feature. But really quickly, by clicking this option, Amelia will automatically reconcile all transactions possible, starting from the bottom and making its way up to the top in chronological order that the transactions were created. So for example, the first invoice with the first payment and so on and so forth. The next one might look new to you, and it's not new. It's simply only available for us at Amelia. But don't worry, you can hop on chat and ask us to use it on whichever account you need. So this undo all reconciliations button will do just that. It doesn't touch any transaction, so it doesn't refund or cancel anything. It will simply unlink and unreconcile all transactions in order for you to start fresh from the bottom, let's say. Because sometimes it can get confusing when there are a lot of transactions in an account and you don't have a clear image of what should be reconciled to what. So it's nice to be able to start from scratch with the reconciliation and really go one at a time. Another situation where this is very handy is if you've used the reconcile account feature we just saw previously, and there is still a reconciliation error. So there's still a red triangle on the account. You can ask us to use this button, undo all reconciliations. And then if you try again using the reconcile account button, usually that does the trick and the reconciliation error has disappeared. So if ever that's something that happens, you can always hop on chat and we will gladly help you guys out. The next button is the same as the add purchase subtab in the client account you can see on the top right. By clicking add purchase in the operations menu, you will be brought to the store to purchase things on behalf of the client's account you are in. Same goes for add client reservation. This will bring you directly to your facilities tab, and under your calendar subtab, you'll be able to add a client reservation for this client. You can also export an account statement, and you can choose a specific date range and export this client's account statement or email it to them directly while adding a little message when doing so. This is downloaded or emailed in a PDF format. So let me give you a quick look of what it looks like. Here is an example of what it looks like without details. So when exporting, you'll have the option to choose with or without details. So this is without. And if you export it with details, as you can see, there are more details in the description column. So if you want to have more information. Next, you can also export the account history, and this is exported into Excel. So here's an example. Basically, it's a list of all the transactions with the date, the name, what the transaction is, the amounts, and etc. Now, last two little buttons in the operations button, you can expand all, which will expand all of the transactions just as if you clicked on the little plus on each transaction. And same thing for collapse all. If they are all expanded, if you click on collapse all, this will collapse all of the transactions and bring it back to, as you can see on the screenshot right now. Next, by clicking on the add filter button, you will see you can filter through transactions by reconciliation or by type. When filtering with reconciliations, you can search for transactions that are not reconciled, partially reconciled, if there's an error, or if they're fully reconciled. When filtering by transaction type, you can choose to filter only invoices, credit memos, payments, refunds, cancellations, or account deposits. Next, the sort button and search bar. So for the sort button, by default, it is set to newest first, but if ever you want to see the oldest transactions first, this is where you can do so. There's also the search bar where you can search for a specific transaction. And on the bottom left, you can also set how many transactions you would like to see per page. So by default, it is at 10, but you can also set it to 25, 50, or 100 transactions. And this leads us to our first question period. So Mackenzie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. So we got a question in the chat and we got a question in the Q&A. I'm going to leave the question that's in the chat for a minute here. And I have a couple other frequently asked questions that I'll cover real quick. So my first one here is, my client asked for credit, then changed their mind, and now they want to do a refund. How do I do that? So since the credit is already on the account, we can refund that from the original payment. And if the original payment was made with a credit card, well, we can refund back to their card as well. Another quick question we have here. I accidentally refunded by check, but it should go back onto the client's credit card. How do I fix that? So we can cancel, excuse me, any offline refund and refund to a credit card, again, as long as the credit card was used for the initial purchase. So it's no problem to cancel a check refund. So I guess we'll leave it at that. I know we have a couple other question periods coming up, so I'll pass the floor back to Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie. Great questions, guys. And feel free to ask a question, because if you have that question, it's more than likely that somebody else has the same question. So really feel free. It'll be our pleasure. So moving along to the income versus cash flow portion of the webinar. So now we're going to dive deeper in the income and cash flow columns. These might seem a little confusing at first, but I like to look at these as no money and money. If it does not include money, like an invoice, for example, it will appear in the income column. But if it does involve money, like this payment or a refund, for example, then it will appear in the cash flow column. Here's the same account we were looking at earlier, but I have canceled the activity and refunded the payment. You'll notice that the canceled invoice appears with the type credit memo. Now, canceled purchase in the description, and 420 appears in brackets under the income column. When amounts appear in brackets, they represent a negative number. So you can imagine there's a little negative sign or a minus sign in front, for example. So every time an invoice is canceled, a credit memo is created to reflect that the income was reduced. In this case, this represents the amount of income on the account being reduced by $420 because of the cancellation. Same concept for the refund we see just above. We can see that it was a cash refund and that it reduced the cash flow by $420 because the $420 we initially received was refunded. So our cash flow goes back to zero. Here's the same account once again, but with 3 more transactions. Now, because the refund was made offline, a cash refund in this case, I was able to cancel the refund. It's important to note, however, that if this was an online payment, so via credit card or eCheck, I would not have been able to cancel the refund. So now let's look at how this refund cancellation affects our balance. Because a refund was canceled, we still have the money from the payment. The payment is still intact. So our cash flow goes up by $420. Next up, we see that there was a transaction with the type cancellation, and the description is payment correction. So remember, because we canceled the refund, we still have that $420 payment intact. And because it is an offline payment, I was able to cancel it. And this is what we see here, the cancellation of the $420 payment. How does this affect our balance? Well, as we can see, before this happened, the balance on the account was 420, but now because we canceled a payment, it is like that payment never happened. So the balance goes back up to zero, and Katrina no longer has a credit on her account. And lastly, at the top, we can see an account deposit made that can be used towards a future purchase. Now, this is just like a payment, so it will make the cash flow go up and the balance go down because the client now owes $10 less, which results in a final account balance of $10 worth of credit. Now, you might ask yourself why we just went through this very random assortment of transactions. And to be honest, I'm not really sure. Nah, I'm just kidding. It was to demonstrate how all 6 different transaction types affect the balance. Now, let's recap quickly, and then we'll go through a scenario and put what we've learned into action. So let's be attentive here and let's review what makes a balance increase or decrease. And let's think about it logically. I like to think of the word balance as what the client owes. So let's start with what increases a balance. An invoice. When an invoice is created, it increases what the client owes. So the client owes more money, he owes the amount of the invoice. Same thing for a refund. If a refund is made, the client paid less, so they owe more. So the balance increases. Cancellation of a payment is the same logic behind it. The payment was canceled, so kind of refunded, and that payment still needs to be made. So the client owes more, which increases the balance. Next, if we look on the right side, what decreases a balance? A payment, for example, decreases a balance because it means that the client owes less money. When you make a payment, that means you owe less money, so the balance decreases. Same thing for a credit. If a credit is put onto a client account, the client owes less money, so the balance decreases. And lastly, an account deposit, which is essentially the same thing as a payment. It is a payment made in advance, so the client owes less money and the balance decreases as well. So this brings us to our first scenario. So it'll pop up on screen. If a client has a balance of $100 on his account, I would like to bring his balance down to 0. How can I do this? So create a $100 credit, enter a $100 payment, cancel a $100 invoice, or all of the above. Amazing. So we do see that 62% of you, the majority, have selected the correct answer. So in fact, all of the above was the right answer because as we saw, creating a credit will reduce the balance, entering a payment will reduce the balance, and canceling an invoice will reduce the balance. So everybody that answered the other answers, you are not wrong. It's just that the other answers were also correct. So no worries about that at all. And thank you very, very much for participating. This was great. And we have another scenario coming up shortly, so be sure to participate at that one as well. So let's move on with the current versus expected balance. So we're going to compare current balances and expected balances. And you might have come across an account like this before and wondered, what exactly does this mean? Well, it's actually quite simple. An expected balance appears when there are planned transactions that will go through in the future, or there are transactions currently processing, like a refund, for example. So the current balance is the balance on the account at this point in time, while the expected balance is the balance that will be on the account once all the planned transactions go through. For example, if you have installments set up in the upcoming payment subtab that we can see over here, you will have an expected balance. And we will also revisit this upcoming payment subtab shortly to look at it more in depth. Now we are going to go over how to read a client account. So here's a client account that might seem a little lengthy and complex, but we wanted to give you an example you might actually have to deal with one day. Because let's face it, most of us have had to deal with an account similar to this one, and we wanted to show you that if you break it down, it might not be as difficult as you thought. So let's go ahead. As you can see, Sarah here has an $85 balance on her account, but Sarah is a really, really good client. If my memory serves me right, she paid all of her balances. She paid all of her invoices, in full, and she always pays everything on time. So I'm wondering why this $85 balance is actually on the account. So the first step would be to find the last time there was a $0 balance on the account. So we see here there are 39 items on the account. We can change it to 50 per page, so we see all of the transactions. And then we'll look for the last time there was a $0 balance on the account. So we can go down the right column and find a 0. So in this case, we see that the last time it was actually at 0 was when the first payment was made. So as we can see, there was the first invoice and the first payment was made in full, 514, 514. And then we see that there is a $100 invoice, but no payment was made for it. We can also see that it is unreconciled. So this is a good little hint telling you this might be the reason why there is a balance on the account. So let's keep going and look at the rest of the account to make sure that that is really what is happening. So here we see the invoice was paid in full. If we keep going up, we see that all of these invoices were paid in full and zero out the balance of the invoice. Here we see an invoice of $40 and two payments of 20. Oh, and here we see a $15 payment that creates an $85 invoice on the account. So this is probably for the $100 payment, the $100 invoice we saw earlier, and this is what creates the balance. But we're going to look at the rest of the account just to make sure that that is really why there is a balance on the account. So if we keep going up, we're going to look at the rest of the account and notice that all of the invoices were indeed paid all the way to the top. So all the invoices here paid in full. And now we have confirmation that the current $85 balance is indeed because of the $100 invoice that we saw at the bottom. So if we look at it, we can see that these membership monthly fees were not paid for in full. There's only a $15 payment for it. So this can be due to a multitude of reasons. So maybe there was a payment made offline and nobody entered it in the account. That is possible. Or there's a missing payment. So this is really a good way to break down an account and really find out why there is a balance on an account, for example. Now, this leads us to our second question period. Mackenzie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So we've got a few more questions in the Q&A section, and one of them I hung on to actually answer live. And the question is, what is the best way to cancel a balanced credit? For example, the client's balance is negative $20, but should be $0. So we're going to have a good screenshot example here in a little bit. But the answer to this is to create a $20 invoice to counteract your $20 credit, which will bring the account balance back to 0. And then you can reconcile those two items together. So that way you know that that invoice of $20 is for that credit of $20. A couple more here, just quick frequently asked questions as well. A family wishes to have the grandmother pay for the child's activities. She's not on the account, nor wants to be, just needs to make a payment. Is that possible? So we can accept a credit card or any offline payment from anyone who is not on an account, so long as the registration is being completed by somebody that is on the account that gives us access to where we can process the payment. It is possible. And say the same thing goes in person. It is possible to make that payment. And one more here, two parents would like to split the installment payments for one invoice. Is that possible? So with installments, we have the ability to change the method of payment of an installment. And in doing so, we can make every second installment payment, let's say the other parent's credit card or eCheck. And then that way they're switching back and forth and alternating to take turns paying for the invoice. So I'll leave it at that for now for the questions, and I'll hand it right back to you, Tristan.
Thank you very much, Mackenzie, and thanks again for your participation. Great questions. Someone even jumped the gun and they asked the question we're going to answer later. So we're going to put some visuals on what Mackenzie just said in our FAQ section at the end. So let's keep going with our upcoming payments subtab. So here, this is a newer subtab that we just introduced a few weeks ago. So it might be new to you guys. So we wanted to take the time and really explain to you what you can see, what you can find, etc. So here, if you click on upcoming payments at the top, you'll see that you can access subscriptions, installments, and checks. So if we go to the subscriptions menu, you'll see your active subscriptions. You will also see the planned date of your subscriptions, the payment method, and the amount of the subscription. You can also edit the payment method by clicking there. And you can also add columns if you wish by clicking on admin comments and applying. As you can see, if there were any, they would appear over here. You can also search and select multiple if you have multiple active memberships. Next, in the installments menu, you can see that both eChecks and credit cards will be listed, and you can always look at all the information. So you have the plan date, the purchase date, the payment method, and even the installment plan of that specific installment. You can always mass edit your installments by selecting them and then clicking on the three dots. You can change the payment method, the plan date, the amount, or cancel the payments. You can also do the same thing on an individual transaction or an individual installment rather by clicking on the three dots on the right. You can add more columns just like you can in the subscription menu for decline reason or admin comments. You can add filter for status, so planned, canceled, processing, canceling, refunded, uncertain, or organization closed. You can reset filters. And next in the checks menu, so this is really for offline checks. As you can see, most of the information is very similar to the two other menus. You can see plan date, purchase date, the payment method, and at the end, you will see you are able to, by clicking on the three little dots, to deposit the check or cancel the payment if ever need be. So next, let's look at the purchases subtab. Here under the purchases subtab, you will have a breakdown of all the purchases of all the account members on the account. So here you will see the first one listed is the account owner. You can see that we can also change all the purchases you can see. So by default, it is set to 12 months, but we're going to set it to all. Then you can see active membership. So the next billing date, you can see the price, invoice, you can edit it, cancel it. Also, if a person has multi-passes, you will see the remaining amount of passes. And if you want to go directly to the invoice, you can click right over here and it'll bring you to the invoice in the client billing tab. You can also see all the activities purchased by other people on the account. At the bottom, you will see merchandise with the shipping status. And at the bottom of the page completely, you will see all of the cancellations. So in this example, we have 2 canceled drop-ins. So now it's our second scenario. So let's put it up on screen. Select all the reasons that could explain why an expected balance is on an account. So why would an expected balance appear on an account? You can select multiple choices if you wish. So a refund is processing, there are installments planned, the client has a subscription, or there is a cash payment. So select all that apply, all that would make an expected balance appear on the account. All right, so let's take a look at your answers. So great. We see that 91% selected the first 2 choices. That's really good. So a refund is processing. That will indeed create an expected balance on the account. If installments are planned as well, that's super good. However, this third option was kind of a trick that I wanted to put there because I do want to explain why. So if a client has a subscription, there actually won't be an expected balance on the account. And the reason for that is when there are subscriptions, they're actually the invoice is created at the same time as the payment on a monthly basis. So that's why there's no expected balance on the account. And lastly, there is a cash payment. Most of you guys did not select it. That is good because a cash payment will not create an expected balance. So thank you very much for your participation, guys. Really, really good. And it's fun little ways to learn. So it's always more fun when you guys get to interact and when we get to interact with you guys. So let's move swiftly along to our frequently asked questions. So question number 1, I created a credit memo by accident. How can I cancel it? So Mackenzie touched on this a little earlier. The answer is that you can actually cancel a credit, but you can create an invoice to balance out the account. So let's take a look at how we can do that. As you can see, there's $50 expected balance on the account. And by creating an invoice here, we can select the custom invoice fee, sorry, enter the amount. And once it is saved, you will see that the expected balance on the account is now back to 0. So, and then you can actually reconcile the um, invoice you just created with the credit memo itself. You might also have noticed that when creating the invoice, we had to select a custom invoice item. Now, the first time you create an invoice, you will see there are no custom invoice items you can select. That's because you have to create them. And you can do so by going under the discounts and fees tab and custom invoice items. And by clicking on the blue button at the top, new custom invoice item, you can create them. Same thing goes for credits. When you create a credit, you will have to create a custom invoice item. You only have to create it the first time, then it will always appear and you will be able to select it. So next, actually, I think we had, no, that's it. Sorry about that. So a parent registered themselves to an activity instead of their child. How can I fix this? So when a parent registers themselves, the solution is to cancel the invoice without refunding the client. And then you can repurchase the activity for the child in the store on their behalf. So let's take a look at this. We're going to cancel the invoice. You can expand it, click it on cancel/refund items, select the item, and then we're going to leave the credit amount in full. And we are going to leave the refund amount at 0 because that is going to create a credit on the account that we will use to complete the purchase. So once we save, as we can see, we have a credit available on the account that we can use. So we can go ahead and add purchase. This will take us to our store and we can complete the purchase for the child, the correct participant in this case, on behalf of the client. So we can select it here. And one little tip and trick that can help for situations like these, you can set age restrictions for your activities. So in this example, we can see that on the day of the activity, the participant must be between 8 and 18 years old. And this will restrict any parents from registering themselves instead of registering their children. So a little restriction like this might help you a lot if you have a couple parents that do end up making that mistake. So FAQ number 3, I'm trying to replace an activity, but the new activity is not appearing as an option. So when you do replacements, you have to make sure that the old and the new activity are within the same program. Otherwise, it will not appear as an option and you won't be able to replace said activity with the desired activity. Next, how do I apply a credit towards a future installment? This is a great question. We do get a lot. So the solution for this is to actually go in your upcoming payments tab and edit the amount of the next payment, for example, and reduce it by the amount of credit available. So here we have an example for you guys. We can see there is $25 worth of credit as an expected balance. So if we go in the upcoming payments tab and select installments, we can edit the amount of an installment and reduce the amount by $25. So here, instead of $42.83, we're going to change it to $17.83. And once we save and go back to the client billing subtab, we'll see that the balance is back to 0. And then we can reconcile the credit memo with the invoice that the to the invoice that the upcoming payment was paying for. And then you will see all the reconciliation makes sense and all the transactions on the account have green check marks. Now let's finish off with our tips and tricks. So tip and trick number 1, how to refund without canceling an invoice. So if ever there is a 0 balance on the account, you have to create a credit first, and then you can invoice directly from the electronic payment via Amelia. So on screen here, you can see we have created the invoice. And then once we have said invoice, we can expand an electronic payment via Amelia, click on refund and save. you have to make sure that this payment was made in the last 12 months and that the amount is more than the amount that you want to refund. So let's look at that one more time. Here you can see that we are going to create a credit. So operations, create credit. We're going to go through the works, create the credit for the amount that we want to refund back onto the credit card, and uncheck the taxes in this case. And once we save and create the credit, now we will be able to expand the payment like we just saw earlier and apply the refund back onto the credit card. So number two, when a client has not received a refund, but you do not see that the refund has failed in the account, make sure that the refund was done online. So sometimes it happens, you want to refund a client back onto their credit card. However, you went by operations and you recorded an offline refund instead. So that can happen. And one way to verify that, if you expand the refund like so and click on view refund, here you see that there is the credit card information that appears. This means that the refund was done online. Now, if the refund was done offline, you would have only seen the amount of the refund and any notes you might have left when doing the refund. So you won't see any credit card information. So that's a little tip to double check that you properly did the refund online. Number three, how to edit a specific client subscription end date. So you can go in purchases and next to the active membership, you can click on edit and select the expiration date that you please. So you can select whichever month you would like the subscription to end at. And lastly, final tip and trick, online payments are batched within 24 hours. And if they have not been batched yet, they can be canceled but not refunded. So when you have an electronic payment via Amelia, it is batched within 24 hours. And before you can cancel the entire payment, and the funds will not be taken out of the client's account. However, if you do wish to do a partial refund, so you want to refund half of the payment or something like that, you do have to wait until the payment is batched. So the next day, for example, and then you can go in and do the partial refund. And finally, our last question period, Mackenzie.
Cool. So thanks for the handoff. We just got a question in the Q&A, and I'm just a little unclear about what the question is, but I'll read it out, and I think I maybe have an understanding of what the answer might be. And so let me know in the chat if I'm incorrect. If I had a program that is a set cost, but the client is to pay for half due to participation. So if you mean that let's say your program is $100, but the client is only supposed to pay 50 because maybe they're only registering halfway through or something like that, we do have the ability when configuring activities to set them up to be prorated. So that way, let's say every time one occurrence passes or one class, a certain amount is removed automatically from how much they're purchasing. Oh, and I see a thumbs up on that answer, so I'm gonna take that as a yes. I've got a couple other questions here. Again, a couple frequently asked questions regarding client operations and client billing. So how long does it take for an eCheck to fully process? So eChecks are a lot like real checks, and they can take up to 10 business days to process. So there is a little bit more of a wait time. And another eCheck question here, an eCheck is processing. Is there any way to cancel it? Yes, there is, and we can cancel it by expanding the payment in the client billing section of the client's account. So as Tristan showed many times, if we click that little plus button beside the payment, you'll have the option to cancel it. I'm just going to take a step back here and correct myself as I've been informed that that was an incorrect response, but we're all human here. We can't cancel eChecks, but we can cancel the credit card payment. So if the eCheck is being processed, we cannot cancel it from that function. We can cancel offline payments and credit cards, but once again, I was incorrect. We cannot cancel eChecks. My apologies. Perfect. I guess that's it for our questions.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Mackenzie. Super, super appreciate it. And thank you guys for your participation in the questions and in the little scenarios that we had for you. super fun. So now we're going to finish up the webinar by reminding you that we do have our webinar roundup that will be sent to you guys in the next few days. And if ever you want to revisit a topic, you can always go into our knowledge base. We have articles, great articles written on all of the different aspects of the platform. You can get to it by clicking on the little symbol on the bottom right of your screen and then searching up where it says find your answers now. If you still don't have any answers or weren't able to find any the answer you were looking for, you can always send a message to the support team and we will gladly help you guys out. So thank you very much for attending today. Hope you learned a few things and I wish you an amazing day. See you guys.